opponent has 10 seconds, as fast as Firouzja is, play the clock as well as the game. And we've got, no surprise there, another Italian. Wesely has white. Firouzja starts with 3 minutes and 40 seconds. And here we go. Mainline Italian.
If you are Wesely and this h6, g5 stuff comes up, do you sacrifice the piece because Alireza doesn't have enough time to calculate? Or we just have to remember that it's no longer a bullet. 3 minutes, even if you're down on time, is plenty of time to work with.
I think it's the latter. And that actually makes it very hard to adjust. You've just played something like 50 minutes of bullet chess. You've kept one eye on the clock for the last hour. Suddenly, you can slow down, you can breathe. There's no increment, but that doesn't mean that you have to blitz out moves. And a case in point, Firouzja with a big decision here, Robert. Does he take the bishop? Does he go bishop b6? He keeps the status quo by dropping the bishop back to b6, as is so typical in these Italian positions.
Right, there's a stare down of bishops, but if you take on e3, after f takes e3, there's some pressure down the king side with the queen sliding to e1 and out on that diagonal. So look at black just playing solidly. I like it how quickly Wesely's playing. He's kept the initial time advantage.
Although the position is quite symmetrical, I like this choice for Wesely because the position is also open-ended. This promises a long middle game, and this promises a middle game as Firouzja forces the exchange of bishops, but in return, it costs him a potential tempo, and it costs him control of the center. It will force black to make a lot of hard decisions in the next couple of moves, and we're finally getting, Robert, some sort of direct confrontation between the armies as Wesely pushes d4.
Yeah, this pawn on d4 is well defended. You would like to play b4 and expand on the queen side, but then you have to contend with e takes d4, and the b4 pawn might be loose, but there are queen b3 tactics in the air. So this needs to be thought of. It can't just be played without using your calculation skills. And Wesely, he might expand with his b4 push.
Queen b3 itself was a low-risk move, but then you would have run into knight a5 related ideas. So he does play on the queen side, but he does it a little bit differently. He establishes a bishop on this very nice square. Notice that black can no longer play a6 because he took on b6 with a pawn. That is the drawback of the exchange on b6. The strength of it for black is that he's got this long-term pressure with his rook on the a4 pawn without the rook having made a single move, as Firouzja tries to trade another pair of minor pieces. And the more the position simplifies, the easier it becomes to play quickly for black, who's brought this time advantage down to 40 seconds.
That's huge because Firouzja is the faster player between the two of them. But Wesely, he has the type of position that he typically is able to win games, even from equal positions. He just maneuvers. He just gets a little plus here. The knight gets an f5 first. But Daniel, there isn't too much happening just yet.
There isn't too much going on, and black is definitely maybe a tiny bit worse because of his damage structure. But if you showed Firouzja this position and said, this is what you're going to get after 18 moves, I think he would be relatively happy. Now, the next big question, does black establish a presence on f4? The drawback of playing that move prematurely is that you're softening up the e5 pawn, and white can put a rook on d1 and start threatening things like d takes e5. Instead, knight f6 back to h7. Is he aiming for g5? It's a moot point. Does Wesely blunder the pawn at a4? He blundered a pawn.
He just hung the a4 pawn. The queen and the rook are lined up, and Firouzja takes it.
Oh, that's a huge deal. And Wesely had been doing great, building up that time advantage back to a minute. Now he's a pawn down for no compensation, and now Firouzja can play down the a file and try to trade more rooks.
The only good thing is Wesely is up nearly 50 seconds on the clock, so he can try to use that to his advantage. Wesely is a very nice person. Shameless flagging is not in his vocabulary, but let's learn some new language today, Wesely. You have to go for it.
It absolutely has to be in your vocabulary, and let's not overstate the case. Wesely is down a pawn, but he has this bind in the center that he's just established. He's also got access to the f5 square, and that means he has serious attacking chances against black's king. I'll be honest with you, Robert, I actually do not dislike white's position here, especially after something like knight f5, which is on the board.
The extra pawn is not actually playing a part. Knight takes g7, followed by knight f5 check, followed by queen takes h6. That's a checkmating attack.
And a great defensive move by Firouzja. Very heads-up play there as he contests the f5 square. If Wesely takes and plays knight f5, that is now out of the question because black will give up an exchange for the second knight. Wesely building up the attack with f4.
And there are knight takes e4 ideas in a position like this because the knight on f5 will lose its defender, but white will throw in knight takes h6 check, after which black takes back, and then black's king is open. So it's actually just an equal trade, but the position does not look pleasant for black there.
And it's time to start talking about the clock. Firouzja is still down a minute, but he's now down almost to a minute on his clock. Again, there is no increment. And I think he just spent a bunch of time assessing knight takes c4. This is what Wesely is so good at doing. He's constantly asking Firouzja questions and forcing him to spend a certain amount of time. What's going on here? As the queen moves up to c6, the pawn is now hanging. Black can capture it on the next move if Wesely doesn't respond to the threat.
And it's a pretty big threat because you cannot afford to give up that pawn. And he brings his king to h2. So if knight takes e4, Danya, there might be tactics with queen sliding to b2 or to d4 even, like just attacking the g7 pawn with a mating threat.
But you see what he's doing. Every move, he is forcing Firouzja to calculate knight takes e4. And Alireza has no choice. He has to assess that move. He's down under a minute, and flagging now becomes a serious consideration. Knight takes e4 is on the board, and we're going to see queen b2. The knight will drop back to f6. And Black is hanging on by the skin of his teeth. Instead, he goes queen to d4.
But knight takes h6 with check. The g-pawn takes. The f6 knight is loose. I mean, the black king is not safe at all here. And now Firouzja down under a minute on the clock.
And he's got to take back with the knight. If he takes with the queen, apparently there's knight takes g7. And then this move, b4, to dislodge the rook from the 5th rank. And that might win the game. Wesely can win with the knight takes g7. And he found it.
Wow, he finds it because b4 kicks the rook off the 5th rank, and the knight h5 check is devastating. What a tactical spot from Wesely So.
Oh my lands, girl. And how crazy is it, Robert, that there isn't a single square, not one, on the 5th rank that the rook can move to. He's got to allow knight f5. Firouzja keeps the game going, though. He's going to try some sort of sacrifice on g2 to force a perpetual check.
Oh, and that's scary. Knight f5, check. The king moves back. Queen f6. Rook g2. There's king h1 maybe in some of these positions.
There's also king g2 and king g3, and I think he escapes the checks. But it might be a moot point, Robert. 20 seconds for Alireza. No increment. He's got to move.
And if rook takes g2 is played and doesn't work, it loses on the spot. So that means that Firouzja, who's down to 14 seconds, he is not going to be able to find a way out of this.
And Wesely should trade queens. Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. Trade queens. Flag him.
Can he just go queen d8 check, queen d8, queen takes c7, and then rinse and repeat?
I wouldn't. I would only be looking at my opponent's clock, but he is playing this objectively. Careful now. This is lost. King f3. There's no check. There is no perpetual here. No way. No way there's a perpetual.
There's only a check on e2 after the king went to f3. Instead it goes to g3. And now there are no more checks. That means the game is Wesely's. There's a resignation, and Wesely So breathes for the first time since the 5